Hi, I'm Kirsten. Welcome to 1 + 1 is 3. This is my birth story. So at the end of my final pregnancy update, I said that I had had a sweep at 41 weeks plus 5, and that was a Friday, and that my mucus plug had started to come away. That evening I was feeling quite a lot of pressure down below from the baby. He felt very low down, and I did have what I thought was a mild contraction, but there was just one. It was on its own and it wasn't followed by any more, so I just put it down to being a practice contraction or a Braxton Hicks contraction, and tried to forget about it and not get my hopes up that labour was starting. That night I didn't sleep very well at all. I couldn't get comfortable, I couldn't get to sleep properly, I don't know why. So I kind of thought that might be a sign that labour was on its way, but I didn't have any other signs apart from lots of discharge. And then the following night I slept fine, so I also put that down to being a bit of a fluke. So I went to bed on the Sunday evening thinking nothing was going on, baby was not coming, and that I was going to be attending my 42-week appointment the very next day for monitoring and a scan to make sure that the placenta was working well and there was still enough fluid there, etc., to keep the baby healthy and safe. Then at 4:30 in the morning I woke up with what felt like pop sensation. It was really strange. I've never, my waters have never broken before in my previous labours, so I didn't know what that felt like, and I still wasn't sure whether it was actually my waters going, because only a tiny amount of liquid came out and I thought maybe I just needed to get to the toilet. So just in case, I kind of waddled to the bathroom, trying to keep my legs as closed as possible, and then once I got there, there was a bit of a gush and I sort of had to aim for the toilet. Luckily I had been wearing a pad, so I could see that there was a slight discoloration of the waters. They were not completely clear. So I woke my husband up, told him what had happened, showed him, and we did actually, it sounds gross, but we did save the pad. We put it in the bath, just so that a midwife could see it, so that we could check, because I wasn't sure if it was discoloured enough to mean anything. I should explain that if your waters are not completely clear and they are slightly kind of brownish tinged, that's a sign that there's meconium in them, and meconium is the baby's first bowel movements, and it can be dangerous for the baby to swallow that, and it means that you have to be monitored and things like that. So it had quite big consequences on what my labour was going to be like. So at 4:45 I called the labour ward and chatted through what had happened with them, and as neither of us were kind of sure whether there was meconium in my waters or not, they called the community midwife, who would have been coming around anyway if I was going to be having a home birth, and then she called me. We discussed it again, and we decided that she would come round just to check what the pad looked like and whether she thought it was meconium, so that we could then make a decision whether I was going to be staying at home and labouring at home or whether we had to go to the hospital. So she arrived and she was pretty sure that it was meconium, so she spoke to the labour ward and told them to expect us to come in, and we started making plans to be going to hospital instead of having the home birth that we had planned, unfortunately. So then after the midwife had left at 5:42 I called my parents. Thankfully they only live 2 minutes down the road, so we organised for them to take the children to school. We got them up and got them dressed and all ready to go to school, and then we dropped them at my parents' on the way to the hospital. I was having mild contractions by this point, but I was too busy to stop and time them, getting the kids ready and the dog and all the stuff that we would need to take to the hospital, because although I had packed a hospital bag, I'd packed it kind of minimally, thinking that I was not going to be using it, unfortunately. So there was just a few extra things I wanted to put in there as well. We got to the hospital at 6:45, and when we got to the labour ward, we were put straight into a delivery room. They were actually really quiet that day, which was quite lucky for us. And they set me up on the wireless monitoring because I had meconium in my waters. It meant that they had to monitor the baby for my whole labour, and thankfully they now have wireless monitors, so you don't have to be kind of hooked up to the machine and on the bed the whole time. So I was able to sit on the exercise ball and just kind of bounce on that and breathe through my contractions whilst being monitored at the same time. So I did that for about an hour and a half. The midwives had read my birth plan, and on that I had explained that I was trying to do hypnobirthing and that I would like kind of a calm, quiet environment. But they did ask me if I minded the doctors coming in, because they were about to be on their rounds, and that they would usually go into every room and see what was going on, and that it would be a few doctors and then some student doctors as well, so it could be a bit of a crowd. And I said, actually, no thank you, I'd rather not. And then at about 8:20, the midwife asked if I would mind having an internal examination. I was actually quite happy to have that because I was interested to know kind of how far along I was, just so that I could kind of mentally prepare for whether I was going to be going for another sort of day or so, or whether it could be in the next few hours, that kind of thing. And I was 4 centimetres dilated. After that point, I did feel my contractions ramp up a bit. I wasn't comfortable sitting down on the ball anymore, and I tried kneeling on all fours on the floor. They put a mat down for me. Then I tried being on my knees and leaning on the bottom of the bed, and I got up on the bed and knelt on that and tried leaning on the back of the bed, but I just couldn't seem to find a position that I was comfortable in. My legs were feeling quite weak and wobbly, so anything where I had to have any weight on my legs wasn't comfortable for me. As you can see, I've got baby with me now. He's a little bit refluxy, so I'm going to try and keep him upright. That's a subject for a whole nother video though. And you're getting another little sneak preview of him. I do remember that at one point when I was on all fours on the floor, the midwife told me that the doctors had been round and that they were happy not to come into the room, but that they did just want to remind me that when you have bigger babies, which I have a history of, there is an increased risk of shoulder dystocia. And at that point I actually just laughed out loud, because that was the reason that they had told me I was not allowed to have a home birth in my last pregnancy. I just tend to think I didn't have any problems with that the last 2 births, so why should it be a problem this time? And also, I'm hypnobirthing, which means that I want a calm and positive atmosphere. I don't want to hear about things that could happen. So since I had got into hospital and they had started monitoring me, they hadn't been able to get a consistent signal on the monitor. It kept slipping off me, and the midwife asked me if I would mind getting on the bed and just sitting or lying on the bed for 20 minutes so that they could get good, consistent monitoring and have some good readings. And that was at about 9:20. And this was also the point where I asked if I could have the Entonox, the gas and air, to help me, because my contractions were getting to a point where I didn't feel like I could cope with just doing my hypnobreathing on its own, and I needed a little bit of extra help. So quite soon after that, the midwife decided that the monitor on my belly was not picking up the baby's heartbeat consistently enough, so that they would need to attach one of the tag monitors onto his head. He's actually still got a little scab there where it was attached, and this is 4 weeks later now. I've never had that done before, so I don't know how it was supposed to go, but I did not enjoy the procedure at all. I thought that she was just going to, gently slide this thing inside and attach it to the baby's head. And I don't know if she made a mistake or something slipped, but it felt like she went from outside to inside in one kind of quite violent motion. And it was quite funny because afterwards my husband said that the look on my face was like I wanted to punch her lights out. I think it was just that I was really shocked, but I obviously did not have control over my facial expressions because I would never usually kind of make it known that I was feeling that way. And I just hoped that she didn't see it, basically. So at this point I had to be on the bed to have that done, and I decided that I was actually quite happy staying on the bed, but I rolled onto my side. Then at some point a second midwife came to relieve our midwife just for a short break, but then also to give a second pair of eyes to the monitor readings. At this point they were discussing the results kind of right next to me, and I felt like they sounded worried or concerned. They were talking a lot about decelerations, and I didn't find it very helpful in trying to keep my hypnobirthing going, keep my mind in a positive place. And I did actually say to them, kind of, what does this mean? Am I heading for an emergency C-section? And they said that basically if the decelerations got any worse, then yes, that would probably be the outcome. I didn't know it at the time, but at that point Phil kind of spoke to them and asked them not to talk about things like that around me, and that if they needed to talk about those kind of things to leave the room so that I didn't hear them, because he could tell that I was getting concerned about it. And because he'd been to the hypnobirthing classes with me, he knew that this was not a positive thing, and my husband is not scared to kind of tell people what he thinks or how he feels. So yeah, he went ahead and kind of did that for me, which was great. So this might sound kind of strange, but at that point I really didn't want to have a C-section. So I kind of went internally and spoke to my baby and decided within myself that we really needed to get this going, because we didn't want to end up with an emergency C-section. We needed to get a move on before they decided to do that. So at about 9:45, a doctor came in and inserted a cannula in my hand. It was quite uncomfortable. I don't have very good veins, as you might have seen in my previous videos, so it's hard for them to find one and insert needles into them. I found it quite uncomfortable, but I just basically tried to ignore what was going on. I sort of gave them my wrist and turned away and carried on breathing through my contractions and tried to just ignore what was happening kind of around my hand and wrist. Now that I look back on it, I was probably being a bit rude to the doctor, which I would never do in real life. But at the time, what mattered the most was that I stayed within myself and that I was focused and concentrating on breathing through my contractions and just blocking out anything negative. After the cannula was inserted, the second midwife came back and wanted to take some more blood from me to test my iron levels. She took the blood, but I was left with such a huge bruise on my arm. It lasted for 2 or 3 weeks. So I was getting quite close to actually giving birth to baby at this point. In my head, I took real comfort from a saying that I'd seen on quite a few kind of birth-related Instagram stories and things like that, which was that every contraction was bringing me closer to meeting my baby, and with one more contraction that I didn't have to go through. I was trying to keep using my hypnobirthing breathing, and I started to feel a little bit kind of pushy, but I decided not to say anything just for a few contractions, just to make sure that that was definitely what I was feeling. Then on the third contraction that felt like that, it was getting stronger. So I told my husband and the midwives that that's how I was feeling. And I asked my husband to hold my upper leg up, and when I had a contraction, to push it back in towards me. And that was really, really helpful. I wasn't actually aware at the time, but my husband said that the midwife didn't really seem in any rush at that point. I think probably because I was hypnobirthing, she didn't really think that I was that close to actually giving birth. And she had only just got her gloves on when the baby's head arrived. I also didn't quite clock at the time that the cord was around the baby's neck, and the midwife apparently said that this was probably the reason that he had been having decelerations as he was coming down. At this point, I knew that there was only a matter of a few pushes before it was all going to be over and I was going to get to meet my baby. So that really helped me keep going. I remember the midwife saying that he had some dark hair on his head, and also my husband was worried because I was pushing my face into the kind of sidebar of the bed as I was pushing, and he was worried that I was hurting myself, but the midwife said to him that it was probably helping me, and it was. My husband said that he thought I was pushing for about 7 minutes in total, so not very long at all, and he was born at 10:37 a.m. straight onto my chest. And after the cord had stopped pulsating, so all the blood had transferred from the placenta into him, my husband cut the cord. After a little while, the midwife suggested that I try breastfeeding him, which hadn't even occurred to me. I don't know why, I just had completely forgotten that that was kind of what I wanted to do. And then it was just a case of waiting for the placenta to be delivered. I wanted a physiological third stage, which means that you just wait for the placenta to be delivered naturally rather than having the injection, which helps it to come a little bit quicker. It wasn't long though, and after a while I just had 2 or 3 contractions and the placenta was delivered. It looked healthy and whole, which was a really good sign. And after about an hour of cuddling him and feeding him, they weighed and measured him. So the first midwife told us that she didn't think he had a tongue tie, but the second midwife then came in and had a look, and she said that she thought he did have a bit of a tongue tie. So I will talk about that in another video because it's quite a big subject. My first son had it as well, and it can create some issues with breastfeeding. So I will make another video talking about tongue tie and my breastfeeding journey. Babies can very rarely have a disorder, which is due to a lack of vitamin K, and it's all to do with bleeding, and the injection of vitamin K helps to clot the blood and prevent them from hemorrhaging. But I just felt like I wanted to have this calm and gentle birth for my baby. I then didn't really want to have to kind of jab him with an injection. There is another choice, and not a lot of people know that they can choose a different option. You can give it orally. They have 1 dose at birth, and then 1 dose at 1 week old, and then another dose, a third dose at 1 month old. And that's just given in a little syringe into their mouth and they swallow it, which for me, I feel is much gentler. The deficiency is very, very rare anyway. If it looked like he was going to have something wrong with him, then I would have, of course, given him the injection. But as he came out completely healthily and didn't look like anything like that was going to be a problem, I was happy just to give it to him in the 3 oral doses, which was a much gentler and I feel kinder way to do it. So that is my birth story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you are interested in being introduced to this little chap formally in another video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.